Friends, family and friends, would you like to take your seats as we listen to some music Christopher chose for us for today? Farewell to the Creeks from the album The Lady and the Piper. Well, a very, very warm welcome to all of you who have gathered here today to say this final farewell to Christopher Brocklebank-Fowler. Together we're going to commemorate his life and we're going to commit his remains to rejoin the great cycle of nature. I'm Kate Buchanan, I'm a celebrant with the charity Humanist Society Scotland, and I'm really glad to be able to be with you this afternoon. It was more than 8 years ago that Christopher first got in touch with me to invite me to the Coach House for a coffee and a discussion about his funeral wishes. Now that was the first of many, many coffees enjoyed by myself, my colleague Penelope, our other colleague Linda, and anybody else we wanted to take along with us. It was always accompanied by a nice biscuit bought for the occasion and some tales from Christopher's life. He was a very good host and, as you all know, quite the charmer. Now it was clear from these visits though that Christopher looked at the world in a humanist way. He was guided by reason, he was inspired by compassion, and he was informed by his experiences in life. His qualities really reminded me of the words of Burns in the epitaph he wrote for his friend and his father's friend William Muir in Tarbolton Mill. It's in your order of ceremony if you'd like to follow it. An honest man lies here at rest, as e'er God with his image blessed, the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age and guide of youth. Few hearts like his with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. Now there are few men that those sentiments could be more fitting for than Christopher. He certainly made the best of his life. He wasn't a religious man, and that's why he chose a humanist ceremony. However, humanism is inclusive, and we discussed that, and Christopher decided that there should be time later on in this ceremony for us all to remember him in our own way and according to our own beliefs. We'll play some music when we can remember him in those quiet thoughts or prayers. Now, the philosopher Anthony Grayling reminds us that as long as we love each other and remember the feeling of love that we had, we can die without really going away. All the love you created is still there. All the memories are still there. You live on in the hearts of everyone you have touched and nurtured while you were here. Death ends a life, but not a relationship. So when we come together to pay our last respects to someone, it helps to bring things into perspective and to understand that we move on in our own lives by finding out how we can best live with our memories of the person we've lost, by not forgetting who's gone from us. Now, you've already had to do that in part, of course, over the last 2 years, And those 2 years have been challenging for all of us for many reasons. But it seems to me far better to have waited for today so that we can all come together without restriction on the anniversary of Christopher's death to celebrate all that he was in exactly the way he told us to, because after all, he was a man who knew his own mind. Now, he was born on 13th of January 1934, the second son of Iris and Sydney, and he spent his formative years in Scotland, beginning his lifelong affinity with the land. And now I've just found out from Simon that he did actually spend time in Wick as a wee boy, which he never mentioned to me, funnily enough, but he did tell me about his parents being the guests of the Marchioness of Ailsa, and he had many happy memories of his time during the war years spent at Culzean Castle. He attended Carrick Academy, he told me, where he experienced the horrors of the Scottish strap, which is a belt across your hands, from his Latin teacher. But happier times were spent looking after the geese and the chickens and helping with the fishing, of course. He'd assist in the laying out of baited lines, sometimes up to 100 hooks on them, and often they'd pull in maybe 30 to 40 fish a day. He learned to gut them, he learned to clean pigeons and moorhens, and for the rest of his days he treasured a letter from Lady Ailsa herself thanking him for his support for the war effort and for helping to feed the estate. He also decorated the facilities at his home at the coach house with a framed £5 note on the wall because it had a picture of Culzean on it. He made me go to the toilet actually to have a wee look at it when I was there. Now, his own Scots heritage was defined in part by his grandfather, who was a Seaforth Highlander who had fought at the Somme and was badly injured, and he told me about walks they'd taken together when he was a boy. But it was my impression that that and the childhood spent in Ayrshire meant that Christopher felt at heart he was Scots, and when he moved back to Caithness, he was coming home. Now, there was much in between those years, of course. After the war, when the family moved south, Christopher attended the Perse School in Cambridge, and afterwards he studied for a diploma in agriculture. He followed that with some practical experience in the field, and following national service as an officer in a submariner with the Navy, Christopher spent some time in Kenya, he told me, working on farms, on tea plantations, and a wee stint as a safari manager for an African film company. He picked up a lot of Swahili, he said then, because few people spoke English. But he really took delight in telling us tales of those days. And at the time, he met some famous film stars, which we'll hear more of from Dick later on. But he told me about wearing his Cameron tartan kilt to special occasions in blistering heat, of hunting with local tribesmen and really admiring their skill and their delight in what they were doing. He told me about attending an old man's day where he was plugged into a gourd of beer and listened to about 4,000 years of local tribal history, each man present recounting a few lines of it. But all of those experiences and memories had a profound effect on Christopher. But my favourite story was of the fact that he helped to calve 70 cows and deliver 7 children, all of whom were named Christopher. A rather embarrassing fact, he said, since interracial relationships were frowned upon at the time. But these experiences had an impact on his parliamentary career, and he refused to join the clamour for immigration restrictions. Christopher told me he was a bit unfashionable for a Tory, holding such strong beliefs in equality and social justice for access to decent housing and health and education and employment. And he once commented to me that the Tories are still not very sound about rational matters, and I do have to wonder what his words today might be about them. But doubtless, whatever your own thoughts, it was Christopher's integrity and his beliefs that led to his crossing of the House in 1981. Now, he had little interest in discussing his parliamentary affairs with me. There was plenty documented, and my colleague Penelope has researched some of those, and she's going to summarise them for us now.
Yes, and it is just a summary, really. So, journalists writing about Christopher's parliamentary career draw attention, first and foremost, to the headline fact, just recounted, that within the space of 15 years, he was a member of 4 different political parties. And if you just knew that, of course, you'd think, what an inconsistent person. But he wasn't. He was a One Nation Tory, a paternalistic form of British conservatism. And this was the ideology espoused by the Conservative Party that Christopher joined, and for which he served as MP from 1970 to 1981. And he must have represented his constituents in North Norfolk well, because in 9 years, over 3 elections, he increased his majority from a mere 33 to 7,928. Amazing. With Margaret Thatcher's rise to power, the Tory ideology changed, and in 1981, Christopher crossed the floor in dramatic fashion in the middle of the budget debate to join the newly formed Social Democratic Party, thereby making lifelong enemies amongst his former colleagues, although some Tories respected him for his moral consistency and courage. Legend has it that he had already rather alienated some when, after his first meeting with Thatcher, he had erected a scarecrow in the garden, dressed all in blue with her face upon it. Christopher, so 2 years later, as a member of the SDP, obviously, Christopher lost his seat to the Conservatives in 1983, and this was effectively the end of his parliamentary career. In 1987, he contested the North West Norfolk seat again, but he lost again by a larger majority. Well, there were 4 political parties. What about the 2 others? Well, he joined the Liberal Democrats in 1988 when the SDP merged with the Liberal Party. And at the 1992 election, he contested the South Norfolk seat, coming second as before. In 1996, Christopher became a member of the Labour Party, saying that he was prompted to do this by Tony Blair's, and this is a quote, determination to pursue constitutional reform, efficient economic management, and fairer social provision, which alone can restore one nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for those insights. Now, as I said earlier, Christopher presented his move to Caithness on the advice of his very good friend Robert McLennan as almost a homecoming. And I think in some ways that can be true, because being Scots is less an accident of birth and more an attitude of mind, I think. Either way, Christopher made a real impression on the community and on the river, and I'm delighted that his good friend Dick is going to talk to us more about those years now.
What you must do, A, B, C, D, E, what are you going to do about it? All expressions I heard many times from Christopher, as fundamentally he was a man of purpose. There was never a conversation without a call to action. I met him 15 years ago. He was the newly appointed manager of the Fishings, a timeshare here I had been passively part of for over a decade, save turning up to fish. However, it seemed that things were now going to be somewhat different. For instance, this time I'd been provided with a pack, amongst which was a newsletter, good I thought, a beat rota, a beat map, and rather concerningly, details of a Rods meeting to be held at the Bothy before any of us were to start fishing, and which we were not to miss. It seemed odd to me that this former MP had become our manager, and when the time arrived for the meeting, 30 years his junior, I was a tad apprehensive. I needn't have worried. From the handshake on, it was clear he was a master of social grace and ease. I just hadn't expected such a warm and friendly greeting. Not a man for 73 to have such abundant energy and enthusiasm for improving the Fishings, and as such, I fell under his spell immediately. Fast forward 4 years to a fractious fishery AGM brought about by a mass resignation of an entire 6-person committee. He had somehow artfully installed me as a chair of a replacement. I hadn't seen it coming, and together with 3 other Christopher-friendly conscripts, we were in for a bumpy ride. Knowing the time commitment of numerous committee meetings, prolonged phone calls, countless emails, etc., etc., Christopher had preemptively diffused any marital objection through artfully casting charm to my wife, an envious skill he had with any woman he met. So now we were all firm friends, and trips to Forss would include consecutive nights of drinks and dinner in his company. The routine was practised. We would arrive at his cottage, 3 loud taps with the feminine black hand door knocker, a long wait, then the heavy door swung open to reveal an effervescent Christopher. Hugs and kisses for Melanie, handshake for me, before being ushered into the sitting room to be poured a glass of champagne from the prepared ice bucket. That magical house, straight out of Tales of the Riverbank, and even a Brock as our host. The interior, an impressive collection of artefacts and utility items, all arranged with military-style practicality. We loved it. Off we would go on topics of the day, new and often repeated anecdotes from his lifetime repertoire, great hilarity, occasional sadness, the whole gambit really, yet lurking in the background the ever-present to-do list waiting to surface. It's probably treasonous to say, but of all the people that he met, and the things he did and the stories he told, my favourite was that we were in the company of a man who had stroked Elsa the lion. We had many marvellous evenings here too, but one in particular was a demonstration of Christopher's natural ability to engage with others. On the night in question, in addition to our party, there were only 4 other diners, all thoughtfully placed throughout the room. However, with Christopher as the catalyst, it wasn't long before conversations became entwined. We ended up as a huddle of 7 around group tables, despite the not-so-approving Anne Mackenzie looking to restore seating order in her kingdom of operation. With Anne at the helm, only his nibs, as she affectionately called him, could get away with that. Later, Christopher even managed to get Anne to join us all for coffee, a feat never to be repeated. The day after, I received a message from one of the diners to say how much he enjoyed the evening spent with Christopher, and it had been the best night out he had had in over 40 years. Such was Christopher's engaging personality. Now I have to talk about his management of the Fishings. In the face of unjustified, threatening and ignorant opposition from some owners who had simply become unaccustomed to paying for top quality, his achievements were outstanding. When he took over in 2007, to his horror, he discovered a paucity of paperwork, a confused structure, and worse still, an in-flight and ill-advised legal dispute with the former timeshare company concerning missing assets and titles to property that needed to be recovered. However, supported by a series of professional administrators who Christopher recruited, these issues were quickly resolved, and together with a new team of river workers, he commenced on a remarkable transformation of the fishing's well-being. Daily, with his dog Simba, he walked the entire beat, 4 miles at least, and sometimes twice. In so doing, he prevented poaching, observed what needed to be addressed, and built strong ties with riparian owners and the wider community alike. Additionally, he ably facilitated cooperation with the hotel, liaison with statutory bodies, SEPA and Marine Scotland, representation on the Caithness District Salmon Fisheries Board, correction of landslips, restoration of pool stands, stabilisation of eroding banksides, installation of walkways, landing platforms and rod rests. Majorly, the outfall to sea was narrowed. This enabled fish to access the river with each tide, irrespective of the actual water level, so seal predation was now naturally limited. The icing on the cake, though, was simply to be met with such charm, enthusiasm and knowledgeable positivity. Consequently, the fishing effort rose significantly. No wonder that the catch, and hence the value of rods, increased sharply too. Such improvement did not go unnoticed by others. I'll read you a couple of excerpts from an article that appeared in the Sunday Telegraph 10 years ago. And Forss House, which stands by a picturesque waterfall on the River Forss, is a delight by any standards. The hotel is well endowed with characters, always a good sign. And then there's the man responsible for the past 6 years for the much improved, now excellent salmon fishing along the Forss, which flows in an arc around the hotel and on out to sea. It's fitting that the picture accompanying the article captures the location of Christopher's commemorative bench above Brogy, his favourite pool. Indisputably, his management of the river stands as a parabolic lump of performance excellence, in stark contrast to the depressingly poor performance pre and now post Christopher. Knowing this would be the case, he was distraught at the prospect of a Back to the Future scenario, horrified that all his good work could be undone, sadly a lot of which has now come to pass. So his memorial bench marks not only his life, but also gives lasting testament that owners never had it so good as when the fishings were under his management. A beacon of hope, silently advocating for proper standards to be returned, and much deserved that he now has that permanent recognition. It wasn't all sweetness and light though. Apparently, a guest speaking at a birthday party given for Christopher described him as being a testing friend. And I know exactly what he meant. I had awkward moments with him too, mostly when I was chairman and having to raise issues with him. This often ended with him reminding me that he was a man of principle who did something no Conservative MP had done since Churchill. Getting tired of this, I once retorted, "What, 2 pints of champagne before breakfast?" Clearly not the observation he had in mind. After his time was managing the river was done, he had more time to spare, and a persistent theme came to dominate our interactions: his family history and how wars had shaped their lives. He planned to write a book about this, and mused it would be called Journey to the River. In researching this, he found that his Brocklebank roots lay in Cumbria, the place where he had spent some of his childhood. This was important to him, verging on obsessive, so we agreed to help with the research during some of his visits to our home, by chance also in Cumbria. We visited his childhood home in Silloth, where he and his brother had witnessed an RAF plane ditching into the Solway Firth. The house was now occupied by an elderly widow. She was lovely, and gave us afternoon tea whilst telling us she had recently buried her husband in the back garden. Both a Reiki and tarot card practitioner, she became more and more interested in Christopher. Oddly for him, he couldn't get out of the house quick enough, and as we were driving away, he exclaimed to Melanie and I, "Did you see the man trap?" The following day, we went to his first school, only 5 miles from our house. He was quite subdued during this visit, saying little except that he recalled spending most of his time howling werewolf-like with the foxhounds at the pen that contained them. The pen still existed, and he stood there alone for some time. Another visit took us to a graveyard at Witcham Church at Dalton in the south of the county. An obscure place to go, but he was following up a lead. As it turned out, every other gravestone there was either a Brockbank or a Brocklebank. This moved him visibly, and he insisted we photograph each one. Lastly, Clane Castle and the Carrick Academy in Maybole, Ayrshire. The former, highly formative of his love of Scotland, and the latter, he claimed, his resilient and principled character. We stayed a couple of nights at the castle with him, where he peacocked as the last surviving resident at the time of General Eisenhower's grace and favour occupation. We all received much fetid attention as a result, which of course he thoroughly enjoyed. I imagined he would be very happy to give guided tours of the estate. After all, he knew it intimately and was rightfully still at home there. Contrastingly, when we went to the nearby Carrick Academy in Maybole, his primary education provider before first school in Cambridge, it was a mere drive-by. Somewhere he was keen to show us, but at the same time glad to leave. It's a grim-looking, uninspiring place. His mood was more sombre, his only comment being, well, there we are. What earnest importance he attached to those visits, but frustratingly for us all, he never got round to finishing his book. Final thing, he was brilliant at getting his retaliation in first. His late friend John Ashford told me a story that demonstrated this. Getting on a bit and becoming forgetful, Christopher was going to stay with John but didn't know how to find his new house, and so they agreed to meet at Edinburgh Airport. They both drove there. They met up as agreed, and Christopher would now follow John. However, at the first roundabout they became separated and had to reconvene at the airport to start again. Slightly irked by this, John was taken aback when Christopher got in first with, "You changed your car." John retorted, "Not in the last half hour, I haven't." So the bench, and the words upon it. Christopher Brocklebank-Fowler, a principled parliamentarian, an erudite and sentient man of the people, he retired here to become a visionary and restorative manager of Forss Fishings. Scotland was where his heart lay.
Thank you very much, Dick. It was lovely to hear those things about Christopher that he probably would never have told me. So I'm very glad to have had your addition to today's memorial. And I also think you absolutely have it. Scotland is where his heart lay. And that reminded me very recently of the poet Hugh MacDiarmid, who wrote, "The rose of all the world is not for me. I want for my part only the little white rose of Scotland that smells sharp and sweet and breaks the heart." So I think you would have liked that. It has been really wonderful to hear so much about Christopher today, from his own memories and from those of a very good friend. But Wordsworth noted that the best portion of a good person's life is their little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. So we'll take time to remember those now. Melanie is going to join us to read some words of comfort by Khalil Gibran, and then after she's taken her seat, we'll listen to some more music that Christopher chose for us today. Thank you, Melanie.
Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find that it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again into your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight.
A fond kiss when we sever, a farewell lost forever. Deep in heart from tears I'll pledge thee. What inside ungoes, I'll wage thee. I'll merely my partial fancy, living part resist my Nancy, but
Was Irish.
I hear the voice.
And so was that.
Yes. She was singing I Fond Kiss. We've remembered with affection and with respect the life of our friend Christopher Brocklebank-Fowler. But we must make our way to say a final goodbye to him at some point today down at the river. But Caroline's going to join us to begin that journey by reading more of the wonderful words of Khalil Gibran, chosen by Christopher.
You would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? The owl, whose night-bound eyes are blind unto the day, cannot unveil the mystery of light. If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. In the depth of your hopes and desires lies your silent knowledge of the beyond, and like seeds dreaming beneath the snow, your heart dreams of spring. Trust your dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity. Your fear of death is but the trembling of the shepherd when he stands before the king whose hand is to be laid upon him in honour. Is the shepherd not joyful beneath his trembling, that he shall wear the mask of the king? Yet is he not more mindful of his trembling? For what is it to die, but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing, but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm now going to ask Alistair, our piper, to get ready to lead us down to the river. Alistair will go outside and prepare, and Caroline will play the final song chosen by Christopher.
I hear the voice, I hear the war, I hear the sound on a distant shore. I feel the spirit of yesterday. I touch the past when the pipers play. The pipes kept playing.